We believe we have a mandate to bring godly change to our nation and the world through the 7 spheres or mountains of influence. Welcome to the Truth and Liberty broadcast, brought to you by Andrew Wommack Ministries.
Hello, this is Andrew Wommack. Welcome to our Monday night Truth and Liberty live cast. And I tell you, we are excited to have you with us tonight. We've got David and Tim Barton remoting in with us from Texas tonight. Their place in Aledo. And I was blessed to go there back in January, and I tell you, it's a great place. If you're ever in Aledo, Texas, or even if you're close, you ought to go check it out. It's a great, great museum. But before we get into the Bartons and talking to them, this is Richard Harris with us. He's our chief counsel, and we've got ways that you can interact with us. You can give questions. The format of this is somewhere around 25, 30 minutes, or maybe 35 minutes that we will discuss current events and talk about it. But then we're going to take questions from you, and I tell you, David and Tim both are just like walking history books. If you've ever had a question or want something clarified, man, they're a great resource. And then we also give away some materials, and we have people standing by at our phones. So, Richard, why don't you give them the information about how they can participate?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, if you want to participate in tonight's live cast, you can go on our website at truthandliberty.net and register there. You'll be eligible to receive our weekly product giveaway and also our weekly or periodic emails that keep you updated about what's happening here at Truth and Liberty. So be sure to do that. We've also got some exciting events coming up, Andrew. This week, this Thursday, actually, John Tesh will be here at Charis Bible College live. We are really excited to have John. He's got a phenomenal testimony of God's healing power in his life. And then the Summer Family Bible Conference.
Let me just interject before we pass that up, that PBS is coming here and filming this John Tesh concert, and they're going to air it all across their PBS thing. He's done, I think, 6 concerts with them. And this time, because he's been miraculously healed of cancer, they are going to do another segment where Barry Bennett and I and John Tesh just sit here and talk about his supernatural healing of cancer. And we're going to put this all across PBS.
Praise
so
God.
what a great opportunity. We encourage you all to pray for that. That'd be a great witness.
That's awesome. Well, and then our Summer Family Bible Conference is in July 1st through the 5th, and going to have a lot of different speakers at that, including Congressman Bob McEwen, of course Andrew and Paul Milligan, and lots of other folks. So that's going to be a great event. And wanted to talk about the giveaway. Our last week's winner was Kathy Hoffman. So congratulations, Kathy. You'll be getting an email if you just respond to that. We'll get that right out to you. And like I said, if you want to be eligible, you can register on truthandliberty.net. And
so what is the giveaway this week? Is it the...
Yeah, the giveaway is A Better Way to Pray.
And I tell you, if you hadn't gotten this book, I'd encourage you to get it. This will either make you love me or hate me. I've had people that have been friends for decades that got up and walked out when I taught on this, because my very first teaching is a quotation from Jesus where he said, hypocrites love to pray. And that's my first teaching, is to talk against all the religious garbage that's associated with prayer.
Yeah, but this is an awesome book. I tell you, if
you read it?
Yeah, of course.
And you still love me?
Well, of course.
All right.
Yeah, it works.
I'm glad somebody does.
So anyway, so register on our website, and if you need prayer, you can dial in 719-635-1111, and you'll have trained prayer ministers available to pray with you there tonight. So I want to tell people about our website. We've got a lot of resources available on truthandliberty.net. We try to keep that updated. We've got a live news feed, and then various resources, including the report that just came out from Special Counsel Robert Mueller. We've got just half of it. This is just half of it.
Do you have the whole thing on the website?
We've got the whole thing on the website.
Oh, wow.
But I only printed a couple trees worth here just to show you how thick that thing is. But that's the kind of stuff you can get on truthandliberty.net. So,
wow.
Yeah, we try to do our best.
Yeah, it's a great website. And also, we have been censored. If you're watching on Facebook or some of these other feeds, if we say anything that they don't like, they will all of a sudden lose our feed. And so we would encourage you to go to truthandliberty.net, and that way you won't lose the feed.
That's right.
Amen.
Amen.
All right, so David and Tim Barton have a lot of things to their credit. We could literally read, we got a bio here on them, and it's multiple pages long. But one of their greatest distinction is that they are the ones that started and run our government, practical school of government here at Charis Bible College. And man, what an honor to have them doing this with their background. David, I don't know exactly how to introduce you because it is a lengthy deal, but you are a blessing. So we appreciate you being with us.
We appreciate it, and we really appreciate the fact that what you did with Charis and what you've done with Charis, and the fact that you've taken the Bible school and added a school of government to it. I mean, you understand that Christians have got to be involved outside the four walls of the church, and you're doing that with the business school, and you're doing that with the government school, and all those. So thank you for having the vision to do that, because a whole lot of Bible schools do not do that. Don't see that vision.
And one other thing I need to say right before we jump into everything, we had scheduled Abby Johnson, the lady that the Unplanned movie was about. She was supposed to be on tonight, but for some reason she had a better date or something. I don't know, but she did reschedule, so she is coming. May 20th. All right, so May the 20th, she's rescheduled to come back. But in case you were coming to this broadcast looking for Abby, she will be with us on May the 20th. But David and Tim Barton will not disappoint. They are such a blessing. So your specialty is really history, and we could talk a lot about all of that. But let's just talk about some current events in the light of what's gone on in the past. And so right before the broadcast started, David, you were telling us about two cases now that have been taken by the Supreme Court. They haven't heard the arguments yet, but tell us what's going on, because I hadn't heard about it. I'm sure many of our listeners hadn't.
We're part of a group that we have three specific issues that we would like to see changed at the court. One is religious liberty, religious expression, a couple of Supreme Court cases, what they call Oregon v. Smith, but it's Employment Division versus Smith. It's out of Oregon. Another one that goes along with that is Lemon-Kurtzman. And since those two cases 50, 60 years ago, essentially you can't win religious liberty cases generally at the court. We're starting to win more, so we're hoping to get those two cases overturned. That would get us back to the Constitution on the First Amendment, which would be real nice. The second is in the area of life. You look at cases like Roe v. Wade, or even the case Planned Parenthood versus Casey in '92. Those are the two key cases on which the whole abortion argument rests legally. And then the third is the Obergefell decision that said, hey, marriage, we're striking down the state laws in 32 states. Here's what marriage needs to be. Justice Kennedy told us what he wanted it to be. So we'd like to see that changed as well. And to do that, you can't preserve marriage as a union between a man and a woman if you don't preserve the fact there is a man and a woman. I mean, you have to have a man and a woman to have a union between a man and a woman. And so what's happened now is with gender identity and the ability to self-define who we are, what we are, nobody can tell me, DNA can't tell me who I am, I'll tell you who I am. It comes into an issue that we really want to see gender preserved. Well, the two cases that have now been taken at the Supreme Court involve definition of gender. When you talk about gender in federal law, does that mean self-identification? And particularly when you look at federal law, what's called Title VII, Title IX, that's sports kind of law where you have to have men's teams and women's teams in college. But what if you can identify whoever you are? And I've always, a great example, a California guy played basketball there till he ran out of eligibility. He's now come back and playing on the girls' team because he identifies as a girl. So, is that really what girls' basketball is meant to be?
It seems like the women would be against this, that you ought to be able to get the women to stand against this in unison.
You know, the culture has so made it such that you don't question what someone defines themselves as. That's the one thing we've been missing in so many areas as a plaintiff. We need a girl stepping forward and said, I had a full ride scholarship come in if I'd finished third in the relay. But this guy claims to be a girl whipped me we need a plaintiff that says, no. He's a guy, biologically, physically, everything. He's a guy, and he just got my scholarship. And so what's happened in this culture where we've raised these young people, they say, well, if he identifies as a girl, who am I to say he isn't? Well, that's what we're dealing with at the court right now is, can you have genders? And one deals with religious liberty kind of approach to it, and one deals with a biological approach to gender. And those will be two huge cases. Because if the court comes out and says, no, you can't have gender, you can just self-identify, that's like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. From going forward, from now, the rest of the time, you'll have no standard for what it is except how I identify. And man, you cannot run a nation with 330 million different opinions on what something is.
Let me ask you a question. This is early to be asking questions, but have we ever had anything like this in our history before? Have you ever run across anything like this during America's history, where people don't even know whether they're men or women?
No, there's nothing like that, because even in early American history, with non-religious people, they still had generally a biblical worldview. So even if you take a Thomas Paine, who definitely was not Christian, he was anti-Christian, he still had a general biblical worldview of God's sense of things, of right and wrong and honesty and truth and other things. Didn't agree with Jesus, but still had that worldview. And we're at a point now where we don't have a common value system. And the thing I point to is, if we had another economic crash in America today, like we had back in the 1930s with the Depression, back then, you know, so many people have lost their jobs. They're starving. It's bad stuff. But you didn't have widespread violence. Violence didn't go up. Now, you had Al Capone and gangs, but violence didn't go up because everybody in America believed the Golden Rule and believed the Good Samaritan and believed those things. And you had a common moral system and said, I'm not going to go steal from my neighbor. That's a wrong thing. I may not have food, but I'm not stealing it. Today, if you had another economic breakdown, it would be how many bullets do I have in my magazine? I've got 30 in mine, you got 20 in yours, I'm going to win. It'd be gang warfare. We don't have that common system of rights and wrongs and values that we had for the better part of 4 centuries. So this is a different one. Now, we've questioned things in the past like race. Is a black actually a human being? But we didn't question genders. That was, you know, we've had our issues with questions, but nothing to the degree that we have now.
You know, talking about the Depression, I was just reading something about Bernie Sanders, and he turned in his tax return and wanted Trump to do it. But anyway, he gave less than 1% of his income to charity. Yeah. And that is another thing, that back during that time, people were prone to help their neighbor. Yeah, and they wanted to work. They didn't want a handout, and so they were willing to work. But now they're pushing this socialism where they're guaranteeing health care, and even some have suggested giving money just to everybody, whether they work or not. Man, our whole framework of morality has unraveled, really, in a large part. Yeah. Makes it terrible.
Well, a lot of those liberals like that, they give just a tiny fraction of their income to charity, 1%, 2% in a good case, and yet they want to take the government, take your money, your tax dollars, and give it away, and act like they're generous.
It's not their money.
Right.
They're all about giving away government money, which is my money.
Yeah. Isn't it Margaret Thatcher that said socialism is good until you run out of other people's money?
That's right.
And that's the thing, that you see them, I don't need to give my money because I can take your money and give it. And it's interesting that even on Capitol Hill, kind of the face for socialism now is young Congresswoman AOC and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And she's got this plan where she says, for my staffers on Capitol Hill, you will have a minimum wage of at least $52,000, but we will cap you at $80,000. Now, the problem with that is at $52,000, there's a whole lot of incompetent people you can hire that are not worth $15,000. But she's now guaranteeing that if you can get a job with her, you're gonna get paid more than you may be worth. Now, there's going to be people worth $52,000, but a chief of staff on the Hill and most other offices can get $160,000, $170,000. Why would a chief of staff go to work for your most skilled people? Why would they go to work for her when they can get twice as much elsewhere? So she will have a very mediocre staff, which is what socialism does. It'll take the low end and elevate them higher than they should be, take the high end, suppress it down. But here's what's interesting. She currently makes $174,000 a year, and she's saying that she deserves more because she works harder than everybody else. So how about the socialism where you think everybody should have the same? Well, not me. I'm an elite. And that's the problem with socialists like Bernie Sanders and others, is the common people versus the elite. I'm part of the elite because I'm smarter than you are. I can take your money. I don't, and that double standard. I mean, that's what you see with Bernie and with Beto and with so many others. That's unfortunate that they don't give like they want everybody else to give.
And Tim, why don't we talk about the Electoral College. There's a lot of people that don't understand the benefit of that, and so this is being pushed by the progressives, and I think it's because it's to their advantage.
Absolutely.
You could basically win New York and California and forget the rest of the country.
Yeah, it's exactly right. There are so many things in culture we don't understand. Socialism, people can't define socialism. I was actually listening to somebody who was doing a series of surveys and discovered that the majority of Americans, when trying to define socialism, actually refer to social media or being like social relational
That's
as
terrible.
the idea of socialism, right? So we can't define words. Well, the Electoral College is something else. Because we don't know what it is, we can't define it. We don't recognize the value in it. Right, Andrew, you remember the old adage that you never tear down a fence until you know why the fence was built in the first place?
Yeah.
And this is what the Electoral College is there was a reason it was put in place. When the Founding Fathers came together, the majority of the population was in very few states, between 3 and 4 states. Well, there were 13 states. And so you had the smaller population states who said, wait a second, if we just go off the popular vote, they didn't call it that back then, but that's what they're talking about. If we go off the popular vote, then 2 or 3 states are going to choose. Well, the small states, we want to have a voice. And so this is where even they came up with the bicameral system. Well, you have the House, which is chosen based on population. You have the Senate, which every state gets 2 senators, regardless of population of the state. So there was going to be a balance. Well, the Electoral College was the way they said, you can't just win the big states. You have to win the majority of the population in the majority of the states. That way, every state has a voice. But right now, there's a lot of states, Colorado being one of them, who says, well, we're just going to take our electoral votes and we're just going to throw it into the popular vote. And as you already referenced, the reason it's dangerous is because you can take the top 10 cities in the U.S. and it has more population than the rest of the United States combined.
Actually, top 20.
Okay, top 20. There you go. Well, top 20 more than the population or more than who voted?
No, top 20 cities in the United States provide enough population to win the popular vote.
So based on how it's voting, so not entire population. But when you look at Miami, New York, Chicago, LA, right? You take some of these
Houston,
major cities,
Dallas.
Houston. When you take these major cities, all of a sudden you have completely eliminated the majority of the states in the United States and said, you don't matter anymore. And in Texas, for example, Houston doesn't necessarily reflect the values of the rest of Texas, right? That's not how it looks. Chicago doesn't reflect the values of the rest of Illinois, but the same way we can say that's true for a state, it's true for a nation. Los Angeles, Miami, New York City, Chicago, that doesn't reflect the values of the people living in Arkansas and Missouri and Iowa and Ohio, et cetera. And so the Founding Fathers were brilliant to say, you can't just win the majority of the votes of the nation. You have to win the majority of the votes in the majority of states. And that's what the Electoral College was about. Every state had a percentage that was their electoral votes. And so every state had a percentage. And so you had to win the majority of states to win the majority of electoral votes. It was a brilliant system, but today, because people don't understand the importance of giving every state a voice in this, they say, it should just be whoever the majority of the people vote for. That's the way it should work. We're removing a fence. We don't know why it was built in the first place. And if you remove that fence, you move much closer to a mob rule, a mob majority, which, as we're just getting out of Easter, right? It's, as Christians, we remember what the mob did. They crucified the Savior of the world, who only a couple days before they were honoring and praising and glorifying, right? Because they recognized who he was. The mob can be easily swayed in wrong directions. The Founding Fathers were wise enough to say, we don't want a mob. We're going to have a republic system that's going to be built on a constitution. And part of that constitutional republic was the Electoral College.
And so, Andrew, what you're talking about, this national popular vote movement, what they've done is they said, all right, instead of having electoral votes where you count the votes in each state, we're just going to count the whole nation at once. And although our system requires that each state report its votes, what we're going to do is we're going to see who wins the popular vote, and all of our states will report every vote cast for that one candidate. So in the case of the 2016 election, where Hillary beat Trump by about 2.5 million votes, they said at that point, hey, Trump won the Electoral College big time. He won the majority of the states. He won the majority of the population in those states. We won the big cities like New York City and San Francisco. We won the popular vote, so we should have been the president. Now, here's where this falls down. Let's say Trump had gotten the 66 million and Hillary got the 64 million. Under this proposal, what that means is for example, Illinois, who voted heavily for Hillary, every voter in Illinois, their vote would then be going for Trump. Now, can you imagine the insurrection you would have in Chicago if all the Chicago people found out I voted for Hillary, but my vote is being cast for Trump? You go to Washington, D.C., 93% of Washington, D.C. voted for Hillary, and they suddenly find out, no, 100% of your votes are going for Trump. You would have insurrection all over the country. So they think this is a solution because it would have helped them win the last election. But what they'll find is this will come back to bite them in a way they never could imagine. The Founding Fathers had so much more wisdom than what we have today.
Right.
Well, and politicians are always looking for a way to help their side win. And this is just the latest way to help their side win. If Hillary would have won the electoral vote and Trump won the popular vote, they would not be calling for the abolishing of the Electoral College. It's no. What will help us strategically right now help our side win? Because that's all we care about. We want our side to win. We don't care about what's best for the country, what's constitutional. We just care about our side winning. Had it gone the other way, they would not be calling for abolishing the Electoral College.
And some people think that this is just, the first time this has happened. But you correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't Abraham Lincoln elected by the Electoral College and lost the popular vote?
There's a whole lot of presidents that were elected with only 39 or 40% of the vote. Abraham Lincoln, Woodrow Wilson, Bill Clinton, I think, had 43% on re-election. There's a whole lot of presidents who have been elected below 50%. Now, sometimes that's because they have three candidates running and each would get a major percentage. But sometimes it's because, again, you didn't have enough of the nation supporting that candidate. And that's what the Electoral College does. It says, hey, you can't just have the East Coast and the West Coast. You got to have something out of the middle as well. So, yeah, Andrew, you're right. There have been a number of presidents selected with right at 41% of the vote.
And, Colorado has passed this thing where they're trying to put all of our votes towards the popular vote. And what that does, you've said it, but here's an application of it to my situation. That means that if I go cast a vote, well, first of all, they're only going to, campaign in these 20 cities because that's where all the people are. So they won't even campaign here. I would have to hear about it secondhand. And if I vote, it just wipes out my vote. It's like I don't have a voice anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it would not be the principle of one man, one vote, which is what the court has upheld for a number of years. It would be very different. And Andrew, as you said, if I was running that campaign, I would spend all my time running my candidate up and down the East Coast and the West Coast. I would not visit Oklahoma City. I would not go to Omaha. I would not go to Des Moines. I wouldn't go to Sioux City. I wouldn't go there. I'd go where the population was, spend all my time there. And so all these other areas, I wouldn't go to Alabama. I might go to Birmingham, but I'm not going to go past that. Not much I'd go to in Mississippi. I might go to New Orleans. I wouldn't be representing the nation. I'd just be representing the big cities. And that is there are 35,000 cities in the United States. And again, you can win the presidency with only 20 of 35,000 cities if you go to the popular vote.
Man, our forefathers had a lot of wisdom with this Electoral College.
Yeah, they
That's amazing.
did.
The more I learn about it, the more I appreciate them.
David, Tim, do you guys have any articles on your website about the Electoral College?
We do, yeah.
People
so
might be able to.
Wallbuilders.com. There's a search feature, and you can type in Electoral College. And we do have this, and we try to document and footnote everything back to original sources. So Roger Sherman is the guy who helps really do the Electoral College.
He's a founding father from back in the day.
And arguably one of the most significant founding fathers because he's the only founding father signed all four major government documents. He signed the Articles of Association before we separated from Great Britain. He signed the Declaration of Independence when we separated. He signed the Articles of Confederation when we tried to form our initial government. Then he signed the Constitution. He's the only founding father who was part of all of it.
And then he also helped frame the Bill of Rights.
Look at that. That's awesome.
There we go. But this is a guy who really was brilliant. He's the guy that came up with this. And so his writings are available online. You can go back and you even can read these debates as they're trying to figure out this Electoral College. They're at the Constitutional Convention or as they're working out this Constitution. So this isn't something that we have to go, well, what should we do? How should we do it? These debates were already had. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We should just study a little history and see why we did what we did.
Well, some people today are attributing the Electoral College to slavery, saying it was designed to protect slavery, but that's not the case, is it?
That doesn't make sense on any level whatsoever. The closest...
Now, it makes a lot of sense if you know nothing about history and don't know what you're talking about. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, right. One of the things is very common in modern culture is if you want to change something, the first step you take strategically in trying to change it is you villainize the people who promoted it, right? So wanting to change the Constitution, what's something we've done in universities for the last 30, 40 years, we villainized the founding fathers, right? They were terrible people. They were wealthy, rich, white guys who were slave owners, who were secularists, separation of church and state. Every slander that could be put against them has been put against them, not just because we want to attack and demean the founding fathers, because we want to remove the foundation they built for America. If you're going to fundamentally transform and change America, you have to hate the founding fathers to do that. Well, the same thing with the Electoral College. If we're going to say this is bad and evil, we should get rid of it. How do you make it bad and evil? Say, well, this was about slavery. My question would be, how was it about slavery? Because if somebody makes a claim, I don't have to prove they're wrong. They have to prove they're right.
Yeah.
So you show me how it's about slavery. I've never heard that accusation before. It is absolutely ludicrous. The closest I've ever heard would be somebody looking at the 3/5 compromise when it comes to, right, considering the representation you get in the House of Representatives, which the North made the agreement that you can only count 3/5 of your slaves for population because you're not giving them the right to vote. So you can't count all of them because since you view them as property, we're not going to let them count as part of your strength in the House of Representatives. But that even was an anti-slavery position.
Right.
So that's the closest you're going to come in the Constitution to something dealing specifically with slavery in that regard. Electoral College had nothing to do with slavery on any level.
Well, I don't want to beat the horse too long, but I heard Dick Durbin, senator from Illinois, one of the most prominent Democrats in the country, say that the Electoral College is a leftover from a shameful period in American history. That just made my blood boil. I was like, either he is incredibly ignorant or he's being incredibly deceitful there.
Yes.
To both.
A and B.
Let me say that coming next February, I'm going to have David on my program, and we're going to be talking about Black History Month. And I just was with David and Tim at their place in Aledo, Texas, and I got 2 CDs on American history in black and white, and I listened to it 3 times in one day, both of those CDs. It was awesome. And people just don't know history. I think I was pretty well versed compared to most, and yet what I don't know could fill volumes.
Well, there's nobody better than the Bartons.
So anyway, we're going to have you back on, but again, give your website, and you also have a daily radio program, and is that syndicated? Can people all across the nation get it?
It actually, we have a daily radio program on over 300 stations, maybe 400 now, but
400.
But we also it's downloadable on podcasts. So I think a lot of people get it with podcasts is where they listen to it. But wallbuilders.com, there's links to all that information. They can find out more. And so, yeah, even a link to our radio program, which is wallbuilderslive.com. It is a daily Monday through Friday. And so something certainly that's available. And Andrew, as you're mentioning Black history, we thought just as a quick teaser. So one of the things that really changed the dynamic of history, grab Nell's book. This is a 5-volume set of American history books. And this was written actually by a president before he was president. Although he was president of a university, he just wasn't president of the United States yet. It was Woodrow Wilson. Now, Woodrow Wilson was a very racist guy. A lot of credit doesn't go to him for his racist positions, but they should. But in these history books, one of the things that he did is he changed the narrative when it came to Black history. As a racist guy, he didn't think we should be promoting Black Americans and the heroic things, the incredible things they've done. And so we didn't talk about their involvement in the American Revolution or the War of 1812 or even the Civil War.
And by the way, this book right here is loaded up. This is done in the 1852 period. It is nothing more than a listing of all the Black heroes and Black patriots and Black stories in the American Revolution, the War of 1812. Heroes like Jack Sisson and James Armistead and so many guys. We knew all these guys before, but Woodrow Wilson changed that.
So now today, if we said, okay, so what Black heroes were there in American history? Frederick Douglass, George Washington Carver, Booker T. Washington, and Martin Luther King Jr. And that's about who people would come up with, right? We'd be hard pressed to find many other names. We would come up with dozens, right? But most Americans would have a hard time. The reason is because of Woodrow Wilson's books. Now, Woodrow Wilson does have a depiction of Blacks in the book, but the only depiction he has, I don't know how well you can see the picture, but it actually it shows a black in an unevolved state where they look like a monkey.
The face absolutely looks like a monkey. And that's the image he has for black people in his books. Now, he removed all of these guys. He doesn't talk about any of the heroes we used to know. And what he shows in the way of blacks makes them look like a monkey. Now, that's
so
Woodrow Wilson.
The new standard of education after Woodrow Wilson, because he was a college president, he became a president of the United States. So Department of Education, right, well, people involved in education, I don't think the Department of Education had been formed already under him. Okay, they embrace his education, but this was widely embraced by public schools. His books became kind of the standard for public education going forward. And so it removed every black from history, all of the heroes that used to be known, recognizing if you go back to the American Revolution, we can make the argument the American Revolution actually began with the death of a black man, Crispus Attucks, right? When you have the Boston Massacre, Crispus Attucks is a black man who was killed.
First guy.
And this is where you have the tensions now are so strong, the revolution is kind of inevitable. The revolution ends with the Battle of Yorktown. Well, the reason the Americans won the Battle of Yorktown actually was largely in part, or at least partially in part, depending on how we make this case, because of the work of a black spy, James Armistead, who actually was a double spy, pretending to spy for the British, actually spying for the Americans. But he got the intelligence that Cornwallis was going to be in Yorktown, got that information to Washington. Washington pretends he's going one direction, comes and surrounds Cornwallis. The reason we were able to defeat Cornwallis arguably is because the intel we got from a black spy in the Revolution. The American Revolution arguably began with the death of a black man and ended because of the intelligence we got from a black man. There's no doubt through American history, there were black heroes all over America, but today we don't know those stories. So February, we will revisit so many heroes.
Amen.
That's awesome.
So let me interrupt, and there's some people watching this that will say, what are two white guys doing talking about black history? And in itself, that is racist. We have gotten to where somehow or another we have these identity politics and truth doesn't matter. It's
Right.
all about the color of your skin or your gender or whatever, and that's one of the problems that we got today.
Well, and this would be the reality too, Andrew, right? If somebody said, who are you to tell me what I can and can't do with my life? And you're going, I just told you what the Bible says. This isn't my authority. This is the authority of the Word of God. It's no different as we're presenting history because we're not making the story up. We're reading you what the history books used to say, right? So this isn't about two white guys telling the story of black people from early America. This is saying this is the story that used to be told and was well known. So we don't say this on our authority. We point to original sources and say, this is what happened based on the people who were there, based on their own accounts, their own journals, the eyewitnesses. It's all history that is identifiable, provable, defendable, and it's not based on two white guys.
And here's the other part of it is this is American history. I'm an American. This is my history.
That's
These
right.
may be black guys, but they're my guys.
That's right.
And so they may be black guys, but I'll tell you what, I connect with Peter Salem, Black Patriot in the Revolution. I connect with Prince Estabrook. I connect with Wentworth Cheswell, all those guys. And I do a whole lot of speaking on Black History Month in black churches. And they're always shocked when a white guy, I'm the only white guy in the congregation, I take the pulpit. And the first time I'm at some of these churches, it's a real near insurrection. The second time back, it's, oh no, I've never heard those guys before. Come back, tell us more. So it's a kind of thing where Tim and I can show more black heroes than most black activists even know. And so it has nothing to do with the color of our skin. It has to do with the stuff we know.
And I nearly hate to say this because it opens up a whole nother topic that we could go on for hours, and we've got 24 minutes left. But the Republican Party was started to end slavery, and it's the Democrats that rewrote and changed all of this and that started the Ku Klux Klan, and that could you give me the exact quote where Lyndon Johnson said something about that if, passing this great society legislation, we will have the black votes for the next 50 years. He basically made slaves intellectually or economically of the blacks again.
Yeah, it is the thing where we do not even know the history of the parties today. We don't know how the Democrat Party came to be or why the Republican Party was birthed. I'm in Texas. Our Republican Party in Texas was birthed on the 4th of July, 1867 by 150 blacks and 20 whites. Every Southern Republican Party was started by blacks, not whites. The first 41 blacks to hold office in Texas were all Republicans. The first 190 blacks to hold office in South Carolina were all Republicans. The first 137 blacks to hold office in Louisiana were all Republicans, and on it goes. You'd never know that today.
Well, and it's worth pointing out that actually the Republicans, when they started, actually were Democrats who were against slavery.
That's
and
right.
They weren't welcome in their party because the party said, no, we're embracing slavery. So it was Democrats who were anti-slavery said, well, then we need to start a party that we can be anti-slavery. So it was actually Democrats that birthed the Republican Party because they hated slavery and wanted to see it ended.
And some people might say, well, slavery is not the issue now, but really it's a different issue, but it's the exact same thing. Democrats, with the exception of maybe one or two, possibly, are all pro infanticide, abortion, even past the point of birth and stuff.
right.
And if you vote Democrat, you are voting for infanticide, for killing of children.
Well, we had a vote in the House of Representatives, Andrew, on whether if a child survives and is born, can you kill the child after it's born? Only 3 Democrats voted no on killing a child after it was born.
That's terrible.
So you're right. Every Republican voted to preserve that life. Only 3 Democrats voted to preserve that life. It is a clear division.
And as you mentioned, you have somebody coming back in May, Abby Johnson, who can speak a lot to this issue because, really, this is the Democrats have been very much about population control and really control in general. Right? That's what slavery is about. Well, it's a lot of what abortion was.
And which lives are worth more than others.
Yeah.
And I can decide which lives are worth more than others. So not all equal. If they're inside the womb, they don't get equal protection. I mean, it's all about hierarchy of what life is worth more.
Well, and so you have the irony that Democrats are now, there are Democrat leaders who were fighting to save kittens because they didn't want kittens to be exterminated, right? But we're going to defend the right to kill babies, even though we want to preserve kittens. There's a lot of confusion. Obviously, immorality, the Bible speaks to this in many occasions where people call evil good and good evil. It's kind of what we're seeing in culture, but there's no doubt the Democrats have embraced as a party much of this very bad ideology.
And we could just apply this same principle to all kinds of things, but national health care, I've got many friends in England who have been refused treatment because their life wasn't worth somebody else's life because either they were older or the chances of them surviving were young. And so the government just begins to start discrediting life. Same thing that happened with abortion. And the Democrats are the ones that are pushing for all of this.
That's right.
How much of this comes down to biblical worldview again?
Absolutely.
Well, all of it.
Yeah.
All of it.
Well, and that's one of the things that generally as conservatives, as Christians, first and foremost, right? But we understand the principles the Declaration set forth is there is a God who gave rights to man and government's job is to protect those rights. If there is no God, he didn't give rights and therefore government's job is to protect those rights. For all of human history, there's really only been 2 main options. Either you had a big God or you had a big government. You didn't have both. And when you see a party embracing secularism, their solution always is bigger government. And generally, the Republicans are the ones who have more of the idea, no, there's a God who gave us rights, and I want government to protect the rights I have been given, not by government, but by God. But Richard, to your point, when you remove morality, when you remove the biblical foundation, it's no surprise you see people embracing this kind of debauchery. It's what Judges talks about, that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Yeah. If there is no moral standard, the only standard you have is what you think is right, and that's a really dangerous place to be.
And David, you helped write a lot of the Republican platform, and am I correct in saying that this is probably the most godly Republican platform that we've ever had, and the Democrats is probably the most ungodly platform that has ever existed in the history of this nation?
Yeah, in the last 2 election cycles, each party writes a platform every 4 years. They write it before the presidential race. And each party chooses 2 people from each state and then 2 people from the territories. So you have about 114 people writing the platform for each party. You do that every 4 years. So 6 years ago, I was selected to help write that platform. We made a ton of changes to move that in a more biblically oriented worldview. This last time we made, 6 years ago, I introduced 130 amendments to the platform, and all but 1 got passed. This time I introduced another 70 amendments. All 70 got passed.
Wow.
This is, not by my opinion, but by a lot of outside observers, the strongest platform the Republicans have had, period, in modern era. It takes a great position on Israel, on morality, on marriage, on life, on all those values God gives. On the other side, you found that the Democrats did remove the word God from their platform, wouldn't even have the word God in there. We not only have God, we have Christianity a number of times, but they had a vote to put God back in, and it's on YouTube. You can listen to it very clearly. The vote lost.
No.
Very clearly, they voted no. They didn't want God back in, but they felt like they needed to put it in politically. So there is a cultural difference between the two. You can read the platforms. We saw even just a couple of weeks ago, you cannot even get the Democrats to agree that there should be a resolution condemning anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
You know, how can you not condemn that?
Yeah.
And so it's really clear there's a difference. But you're right, Andrew. That's probably the strongest Republican platform for life and for family and for individualism of any platform we've had in our lifetime.
Well, guys, we could talk about this for a long, long time, but we got 17 minutes left. We need to take a few questions. I bet you we've had some good questions.
We have a few coming in, that's right. Well, so one right off the bat here is from Sonia on Facebook, and she says, why does it seem as if we think the Founding Fathers made the right decisions? Interesting question.
That's a great question. Yeah. So I would go back with a question of my own and say, well, it depends on what standard we use. So what standard should we use to measure right decision, right? I mean, obviously, as a Christian, I would say the Bible, but one of the things that Jesus taught us is you judge a tree by the fruits. Mm-hmm. So if we just said, okay, let's just look at and see how successful has America been since the Founding Fathers established our system of government. Now, I could ask that. I think it's probably a rhetorical question, but how successful have we been? Well, let's compare ourselves to the rest of the world. Now, we're not saying this in pride. We don't say as Americans we're better than anyone else. We're all God's kids. And the same principle is right what God told the Israelites in Deuteronomy 28. If you will keep my commands and do everything I say, blessings will come upon you. They'll overtake you. You cannot escape my blessings. But if you don't, you're going to have problems, right? I believe that's true for Christians today. You can follow biblical principles and still enjoy the blessings of God in your life. It's no different as a nation. When you look at other nations, the average length of a constitution for the entire world is 17 years. Well, we did our constitution back in 1787. We started living under George Washington in 1789. We've had a constitution coming up on 232 years when the average length for the rest of the world is 17 years. Okay. If you look, for example, at prosperity, if you've ever been to a third world nation on a mission trip with your church, you recognize we enjoy blessings and benefits in America. Other nations don't. But according to the last government census that was taken, if you live in poverty in America, you're more likely to have a telephone, a television, your own car, to eat more red meat, have more square footage of living space than if you lived in the middle class in Western Europe, which is the second wealthiest place in the world. You're better off in poverty in America than anywhere else in the world, which according to the World Poverty Bank, the World Poverty Center, they define poverty in the rest of the world as making $2 or less a day, and that's half the world.
That's $730 a year.
1/4 of the world lives on $1.25 a day.
But there are people today, Tim, who are making Americans feel guilty, like we shouldn't have all this prosperity, and we ought to ship it over, and we ought to help these other nations. And but it's their own government system and ideology that has imprisoned them. It's giving them money is not going to solve this problem.
Well, and it's not because we are not.
Hang on just a second. Let me add to what Andrew said, because Liberia is a great example. Liberia is a nation that said, we'll copy the American Constitution. We will copy the American economic system. Liberia quoted our Constitution top to bottom. They used the American dollar as the economic system, and they went under because they did not have the infrastructure and the thinking that went with it. They didn't understand that corruption is bad. They didn't understand that free market economics is good. They didn't understand what the Bible taught about economics and self-reliance. They didn't understand who's to take care of social programs. The church, the Bible teaches it is not the government that does social programs. It is the church and individuals. Liberia didn't have that infrastructure. We had a way of thinking that was instilled over here that led to something that's produced that good fruit.
Well, and so one of the other measurements I would point to is in the midst of asking, right, did the Founding Fathers do a good job, is we've talked about stability because we've had the longest constitution in the history of the world. We've talked about prosperity, but we also could talk about if you are a parent and you have the option to raise your child anywhere in the world, in what nation will they have the opportunity to become whatever they want to be? doctor, lawyer, teacher, mechanic, right? Stay-at-home mom, doesn't matter. They don't have the same opportunities in other nations they do in America. Nowhere in the world will they have the same opportunities they do in America. Now, it's important to note, I'm not defending everything the founding fathers did, said, and believed, right? To say the founding fathers were right, they weren't right. Just like everybody, we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. I would never defend the founding fathers as people who didn't need Jesus. We all need Jesus, right? We're all kind of messed up and jacked up, and we need a lot of Jesus in our life, okay? The founding fathers are no different. And not all the founding fathers were good guys. Now, the vast majority were, okay? We can count basically on two hands of 250 the people who weren't really good guys. And again, that kind of depends on how we define really good guy. But generally speaking, right, there were some founding fathers who weren't good. However,
and by the way, that double handful, those are the ones that most people can name today.
That's right.
They can't name that 90%.
Well, and with that, I'm like, we probably can name George Washington. He's one of the good guys, not one of the bad guys. So not everybody you name is one of the bad guys.
That's right.
But we do, like Thomas Paine would be one of those guys that most people have heard the name Thomas Paine, at least when it comes to American history, when it was not one of the good guys in some of those regards, even though one of the things that's worth noting is that God uses imperfect people to do amazing things.
Absolutely.
It's the entire story of the Bible. King David is one of the most messed up stories you will read in the Bible because he was a terrible father, right? He had a son rape a daughter, murder another son. He had a son try to overthrow the kingdom, chased his dad off. I mean, David was a terrible father.
He had a son he would not say no to.
Okay. David also, right, has the affair with Bathsheba, murders Uriah. David's filled with pride. He numbers the troops. David had a lot of flaws, and yet David is upheld as a hero of faith because when he was submitted to God, God used him to do amazing things. There's a reason the Bible says he's a man after God's own heart. That's an amazing statement of David, but there's no doubt David was a very, very, very imperfect person. But here's the story of the gospel. God uses imperfect people and does amazing things through them. The founding fathers are that example. They were not perfect people, but God used them to do something amazing. And we measure amazing by measuring Jesus said, you judge a tree by the fruits. We measure the fruit of the tree. No nations enjoyed more stability, more prosperity, or even had more freedoms than we have in America today. And there's nowhere else in the world where there's more opportunity for our kids than in America. Therefore, I would argue the founding fathers did a pretty good job.
Yeah, anybody who would ask the question about why you honor or take the word of the founding fathers is either ignorant or intentionally has been lied to about history because this is exceptional. This is an exceptional nation.
Well, I would say they probably have been through education the last 25 years where they've been taught more of what's wrong with America than what's right. And what's been taught about what's wrong, some of that is wrong. Some of it is not. They've just been taught that it is. But if I take all the wrong, if I could show you the right that you weren't taught about, that would overshadow so much more of what you think is there. And even what you've been taught is wrong, I can show you the perspective on that you didn't get.
That's right.
And you say, oh, I didn't know that. And so Bible says one side sounds good until you hear the other. A lot of kids have heard one side about the bad, but they've not heard the other side. And so in the last 25 years, education has worked overtime to make America look to be the worst nation in the history of the world.
Yeah, one of the things is like what you mentioned, Tim, about the 3/5 clause, that they only gave the blacks 3/5 of a person, in a sense. But it was to limit the influence of the slave owners against slavery rather than allow them to count each one of their slaves, and the slaves couldn't even vote. It would have given the South a disproportional influence.
Right. The South wanted to have their cake and eat it too.
Under the 3/5 clause, every black was 100% of a person. But in the slave states, you only counted 3/5 of those persons and counting representations. Interesting, Frederick Douglass, I think most people know that name. Frederick Douglass said he had been taught that the 3/5 clause, the Constitution, was a pro-slavery document. He said, I believe that because I had good teachers. He said, but then I read the Constitution for myself. And he said, I underwent a revolution in my thinking. I found that the Constitution was in every clause anti-slavery. And so we're told the 3/5 clause is pro-slavery. No, read it. Quit reading what the professor said. Read it like Frederick Douglass did, and you'll find, oh my gosh, the 3/5 clause was trying to limit the power of slave owners. It was trying to elevate those in slavery out of slavery. Totally different from what we're taught today.
Well, we could talk again. Let's take another question. We've only had one so far.
I think somebody triggered you guys.
Yeah, it doesn't take much to get these guys going.
Well, here's a good question. I'm going to put it in my own words, but it's basically, how can these states with this National Popular Vote Compact and the Electoral College, how can they constitutionally do this? How can they change the Constitution without formally amending it?
You got two arguments going here. One is the Constitution gives the states the right to choose the time, places, and manner of elections. The Constitution says we will have a federal election. Now, you states, you work it out this way. So, therefore, that's why states can have a lot of differences in how federal elections conducted. However, there is the Electoral College in the Constitution. And so this is an attempt to subvert that. So on the one hand, you've got the side that will argue, no, time, places, and manner is in the Constitution. States choose. So if the states choose to make a pact that we're going to have a national popular vote, we can do that. But the other side would say, yeah, but that violates the spirit of what the Constitution established in the Electoral College. There is not a clear-cut answer to that. I think for the Founding Fathers, there were, under original intent, there's no question you could not do the national popular vote. Under the wording of the Constitution, literally, there's going to be a case on this at some point in time. There will be a case. That is, if it doesn't blow up on these guys and they end up having an election where all their votes go to the Republican, and they'll say, well, we changed our mind, we'll repeal it. But assuming that doesn't happen first, this probably will end up in a contest, a constitutional contest that reaches the Supreme Court. But under original intent, there's no question that the states do not have the right to set aside the entire federal system. They just have the rights to manage the time, place, and manner of elections.
What would happen if they went with this popular vote thing and somebody got elected and then somebody challenged it? It went to the Supreme Court and it was shown that this was unconstitutional. Would that make the election of that person invalid?
No.
It could, but it's going to be a long way in this side. And this goes back to the election of 1876, where you went basically 6 months without having a president while the Supreme Court was trying to decide who won the election. Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden, the nation was basically stuck in an impasse while the courts decided who won the election. We saw the Gore v. Bush in 2000. It would be that on steroids. Certainly it would be a fast, expedited case, but nonetheless, it would be.
But also, once somebody's elected, all they can do, they can't go back retrospectively and change what happened. They can just say, okay, next time you can't do it that way. So you'd be stuck with the person you got for the remainder of their term. But they could say going forward, that's unconstitutional. But they can't retrospectively go back and say, therefore, you didn't win the election because that was unconstitutional. If that person's already been elected, they would be embracing that position.
Yeah, they could give an injunction right after the election, said, hey, it's in contest, hold everything. And they could not announce a winner. And then they could go back and say, hey, we're going to order a new election. And, so there's so many scenarios of how this might play out. But if someone was announced and inaugurated, you're not going to roll that back. It's moot. It's over and done. If you stopped it before someone was announced and you put an injunction against that, freeze the ballots right where they are, we've got to solve this thing. That could be, but there are so many different ways of going at this.
Now, David, my understanding is that this pact only takes effect when states that have 270 votes in the Electoral College ratify or join the compact. And last I heard, there were 14 states that had signed on, somewhere around 180 electoral votes represented there. Does this thing look like it's going to pass enough states to get to 270? Or
I don't think they'll get to 270. And you're right, Richard. To make it clear, the states are saying, if we get enough states to pass this that would represent 270 electoral votes, then at that time it goes into effect. So if there, and 270 is what we have to have now as a minimum for a president to be elected. In the Electoral College, it's 539 votes. Somebody has to get 270 to be the majority. And so they're saying if we don't get 270, then this national popular vote does not go into effect. But at the time that, let's say, Texas, for whatever reason, threw in their 37 electoral votes, and that put them over the 270, then it would go into effect. So if some state did that, but I don't think they'll get to 270, but I think they will work really hard to try to get there. I think they will get close. Generally, when you look at Electoral College map, you know what the blue states are, you know what the red states are, and it's always those purple states that decide. It's going to be the Virginias and the Wisconsins. It's going to be Florida, and it's going to be Arizona. And those are the states that will decide. And those are the states where it's going to be the hardest to get the national popular vote passed. They're going to do it in Connecticut, and they're going to do it in Illinois, and they're going to do it in New York, and they're going to do it in California. They're not going to do it in Oklahoma. They're not going to do it in Arkansas. They're not going to do it in Texas. It's going to boil down to those purple states. Can we get those purple states to jump on board? And those are the same states you try to get on board in a presidential election to win the Electoral College.
Well, people need to be paying attention as to whether that's, pending in their state legislature, and turn out and fight that.
Amen. Well, we're running short of time. We only took 2 questions, but it was awesome. And again, would you all give your web address and just maybe a little promotion about what you have there at Wallbuilders, your you don't call it a podcast, but your radio program, however.
Yeah, no, it is wallbuilders.com, and it is. We have a radio program, but it's also a podcast. So
okay, well, that's a new term to me. I wasn't sure what that meant.
No. You are so up to date with millennials and Gen Z. You're so hip, Andrew. You got it. It's no problem.
Yeah, and everybody believes that you just lied.
Well.
All right, so wallbuilders.com.
Wallbuilders.com, all kinds of resources, all kinds of information, a lot of original source documents. And so definitely check it out. More information, all kinds of videos all over social media, wallbuilders.com.
And I tell you, it is awesome. And if you can go and visit them in Aledo, Texas, it is well worth the effort. And David has the largest, if I'm correct, the largest private collection of original American documents in the nation or in the world. And I tell you, they are just full of a lot of history, and it's awesome. And thank you to both of you for helping start our practical government school. We are raising people up, believing that we're going to start putting people into government offices. Richard is the one that directs that under them, and it's just a real blessing. So thank you guys again for being with us. It's been a real blessing.
Pleasure.
Thank you, guys.
Amen.
All right.
We encourage folks to sign up for the Practical Government School. We want more students that'll go out and change the world.
Amen.
Well, thank you. Appreciate
so thank you all for joining us, and especially those of you on CTN. You know, CTN has been gracious to air this for us, and we appreciate you doing that. We know that this is reaching people all over the nation and through the internet all over the world, and praise God, I believe that the truth is going to set you free. So we've been sharing truths with you that a lot of people don't know because they've been educated incorrectly, and I believe that this is making a difference. We do this every Monday night, Truth and Liberty broadcast. It's live cast at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and we have all of these different guests on, and it's just always a blessing. Also, go check out truthandliberty.net because we have literally hundreds of articles, and we also link to other websites. So thank you for being with us. We'll see you again next week, 6 p.m. Mountain Time for Truth and Liberty.
Join us next time for the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Find tonight's episode and related articles and links at truthandliberty.net.